Hey friends, I'm coming back at you with another painting video. Today I'm going to show you how I painted my pumpkin gnome. The pattern to this gnome can be found on my Etsy store, and the name of my Etsy store is LC Laser Designs. Here you can see I'm using a cosmetic sponge to apply thin layers of paint to the pieces. This will give you a really smooth coverage and it will not seep over the edges. I did use a brush here for his arms because it was just a little hard to get in that area with a cosmetic sponge. I use the sponge as much as possible to apply my paint to the wood because it gives such a nice even coverage. But you will see from time to time that I have to use a brush to get in those little tiny details. You're also going to see that I have my wood pieces arranged on tape. I apply this tape to a board with the sticky side up, and it holds my pieces down while I paint them. That way they're not bouncing around when I apply the paint with a sponge. Here I am using a brush, like I mentioned earlier, to get in those little corners because you can't get a sponge in there very easily. Also, here's a tip when you're using yellow paint. Yellow is a very transparent color, so when I'm base coating something that needs to be yellow, I usually add some white to the yellow to start off with to help it cover the wood better. Once I have a couple of coats of yellow with some white paint mixed in, the final coat I will do just straight yellow, like you see me doing here. Okay, here you see me base coating his feet and his hands, and I'm also going to be base coating the white portions of his beard that's going to be showing behind the pumpkin, and also his mustache. Now that I have all the pieces base coated, I'm going to start adding some details. Here you see me mixing some of the original orange that I used as a base coat with a little bit of yellow to make a slightly lighter orange for the highlights for the pumpkin. I'm using a round tip brush and just streaking highlights along the edge of the base pumpkin. Now for the section that will be in the middle of the pumpkin, I add a little bit more yellow to the orange to make lighter highlights. I keep doing this process until I'm satisfied with how the highlights look. You can even add just a smidge of white to this mixture of yellow and orange if you want even brighter highlights, which is what you're going to see me do in just a minute. Here I'm just checking to see what it's going to look like when it's glued together. And I'm adding just a little bit more highlights to that middle section of the pumpkin. And here I'm just base coating the stem with a green color, being careful not to get the green on the edges. Okay, so now you're going to see me shade using the floating technique. I have a small puddle of folk art floating medium on my palette right above the burnt umber that you see me dipping into. You can barely see the little puddle. It looks like clear hair gel. But anyway, you dip your brush into the shading medium and you work that into your brush a little bit on your palette, and then you dip just the tip of that angled brush into the burnt umber like I'm doing now, and you pat it on your palette just a few times to get it worked into your brush. Then you lay your brush where you want your shadow on your wood and you pull, and it will create a shadow for you like you see here. Okay, so here you see me doing the same technique all over again. And I just lay that brush where I want my shadow to begin, and I just pull the brush along the shape where I want my shadow to be, and there you have it. You floated a shadow. And if you don't get it right on the first time, you can keep going back over it. Sometimes I don't get my shadow as dark as I want it on the first try. So I just keep repeating the process until I get it exactly like I want it. So if you get it too bold, you can always wipe your brush off and go over it. You can take a damp towel or a wet wipe and wipe it off and start over, and just keep playing with it until you get your shadows like you want them. Here I'm going to add a shadow to the stem I have my imaginary light source coming from the top left on most pieces. So I'm doing a shadow on the stem next to where it meets the pumpkin and on the right hand side, just to give it a little bit of dimension. You don't have to do this. I am an overachiever when it comes to details. And here you see me shading below where the sunflower is going to sit, so it casts an imaginary shadow on his hat. And once again, I'm just laying that tip that has the brown on it next to where I want the shadow to be and just swiping. And it leaves a little shadow there every time. I'm also going to add a little shadow to the brim of his hat using the same method to make his hat look a little bit more dimensional as well. Now I'm using that same shading technique to apply a shadow to the bottom of his mustache. I used a bluish gray color to do this. Here I'm using burnt umber again to shade the bottom of his boots. Now I'm going to use the same technique to apply a highlight to the top of his hat. Instead of white, I am using an off-white or cream color. I'm also highlighting the top of his boots with the same method. I also add a little bit of highlight to the top of his hands, the edges of that leaf, and the brim of his hat as well. For the center of the sunflower, I decided to put some white dots on it. And what I did was I used a mechanical pencil and I just dipped the lead from the pencil into white paint. And I'm using that as my dotting tool to make some very fine dots. Here I'm going to pounce just a little bit of orange around the tips of the sunflower to give it some dimension. You see that I'm loading my cosmetic sponge with the original yellow color that I used for the sunflower, and I'm putting that all over the surface. And then I dip just the tip of my brush my cosmetic sponge in orange, and I'm going around the tips of the sunflower and just patting lightly to apply just a tiny bit of orange to the edges of those sunflower tips. This is just to give the flower some more life and dimension. Here I'm using a small round brush and mixing yellow and a little bit of white together to give me a lighter yellow. And I'm just adding little streaks of that lighter yellow on the petals of the sunflower that's going to sit on top. This just adds a little bit more personality and character to the flower. I'm sorry I didn't get this part on camera, but I took some brown paint and splattered the gnome to just add some dimension and texture to his hat and his shirt sleeves, just to give it a little bit more interest and make it look more detailed. And now you see me gluing all the pieces together to complete this cute little gnome. And after a few finishing touches, the project is complete. I hope you enjoy this file. If you purchase it from my Etsy store, it is available. And I hope you learned something from the tutorial. Have a good day. Thank you.